What's up guys, Chris here from East Coast PC and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be doing a full feature breakdown of this Gigabyte Z790 Aorus Master X we got here. This is the motherboard we're going to be using in our updated editing and gaming combination build here at East Coast PC. And we're going to be talking about all the notable improvements that Gigabyte has made over the original Z790 Master that released alongside the 13th gen processors, including their absurd memory frequency claims. Before we get started, if there's anyone who's not subscribed to the channel, please hit that subscribe button, drop a like, comment, do all that good YouTube stuff. We appreciate each and every one of y'all so much. So with that out of the way, let's get started. Alright guys, first off, let's look at what we got in the box here. We got this little pamphlet that basically does nothing. Gigabyte, you need to do a better job when we're buying a $500 motherboard and actually give us a full manual and not something this basically just a waste of paper. We need a manual. We shouldn't have to go online to download it. Probably our most important accessory here is our ultra high gain Wi-Fi 7 antenna, which is basically the flagship feature on all the upgraded Z790 boards that launched alongside of the 14th generation of processors. Then we have this tiny little speaker cable here. The little thing's so small I don't even know how it's going to make noise. But I'm actually glad we got that. Little pack of stickers that nobody's probably going to use. Little 3M case badge right here. This is our little Gigabyte G connector. I'm glad that Gigabyte actually sends those in the motherboard. That is something that you can plug all your front panel connectors into and then plug that into the motherboard. It really helps if you don't have very good eye vision. Here's two thermistor cables right here that you can plug into temp sensors on the motherboard. And last but not least, we have two nice braided SATA 6 cables. SATA 3 cables, 6 gigabits per second, obviously. And we have 4 SATA ports on the motherboard. Now, when we had 6 and 8 SATA ports on the motherboard and they only gave us 4 cables, that was okay. But now that they cut us back to 4 SATA ports, they should at least give us 4 SATA cables. 2 is very lacking, although I don't think most people that are going to be buying this motherboard brand new are buying brand new SATA drives to use with it, possibly hard drives. But still, you might be carrying over drives from your previous system. You should get 4 SATA cables with it. Gigabyte do a better job there. Now that we talked about what's in the box, let's get to the good stuff and talk about all the features this motherboard has to offer. Alright guys, first off, let's start out around back. We have our very heavy duty nanocarbon backplate back here, and they are actually using thermal pads on the back side of the VRMs to transfer heat through the back of the motherboard into this back plate, which should definitely help. One of the other big features is, I'm glad we started here so we could show you, their new PCI Express slot for your primary slot for the graphics card is literally bolted all the way through the motherboard into this back plate. They're saying that it's 10 times stronger than a normal PCI Express slot. And I think that is a very great feature, as heavy as graphics cards have gotten these days. So around back, what we have for port selection here, we're going to start off with our Q Flash Plus used for flashing our BIOS. We have our clear CMOS button. Then we have our 2 Wi-Fi 7 and Bluetooth antennas. Now up top we have 4 5 gigabits per second USB 3.0 ports. Next we have a display port, and then we will have 7 USB Type A 3.1 10 gigabits per second ports. To go along with that, we will have a Marvell 10 gig LAN controller here. We have one 10 gig LAN port. That is a very high-end feature that not many motherboards have these days. While 2.5 gig LAN is just about going standard in all but your bare bones cheap like basic $90 motherboards, 5 gig and 10 gig LAN is definitely a great feature, especially 10 gig LAN. That is a very high-end feature still to this day. Now for USB Type-C ports, what's really great here, we actually have 2 of them that are 20 gigabits per second. They are USB 3.2 by 2, and that's where you get your 20 gigabits per second from. They are not technically half-speed USB 4.0 ports. There is technically no USB 4 on this motherboard, but that's okay with me. We do have 2 that run at 20 gigabits per second, and then we also have a third one that runs at 5 gigabits per second. I'm a huge fan of this because part of what's been holding manufacturers of peripherals back from using USB Type-C is a lot of motherboards only have 1 USB Type-C port. This one has 3, so that's great. Now along the bottom here guys, We do have a cut down audio section, which that's also fine with me. I care more about having higher quality audio because almost nobody uses 5.1 to 7.1 surround sound on these motherboards. And if you do, you can get a sound card. But we should still have some very high quality audio with a built-in ESS Sabre DAC. What we have is our line out port, good for 2.0 or 2.1 channel speakers, if you have a subwoofer hooked to your powered speakers like I do. Then we have our mic port, and we also have our SPDIF digital optical audio port as well. So that covers our back panel inputs. Now let's come around to the front of the motherboard and talk about what we have here. Alright guys, now let's go over everything on the front side of this motherboard here. Now, one thing that has not changed is the excellent VRM solution. Now, while I do not know, it's very hard to tell looking at pictures of the original Z790 Master if this full-size heat pipe was in here. This section is now cut out. It's a very robust looking look they got going here, and I really like the look of the new motherboard, obviously. But what has not changed is the power design of the power delivery of this motherboard. So we have a total of 23 phases. Okay, we have 20 for the V-core and 1 for the integrated iGPU, and then we have 2 for the integrated PCI Express and memory. So the 20 phases for the V-core and the 1 phase for your integrated iGPU is all 105 amp power stages, top of the line power stages. The 2 for the memory and the integrated PCI Express, I'm not exactly sure what those are. They do not list that in the specifications, but it does not matter. We have 2 of them. Most motherboards only have 1. So that is not going to matter. We have a very robust power solution. And you will not have any problems cooling this thing. There's enough thermal mass under this huge heat sink here. And this heat pipe and this nanocarbon whole solution they got going on here that you will not have any problems. But one other thing I will show you while I'm thinking about it, these little holes right here that's drilled into the back IO shield, that is supposed to drop the temperature by 7 degrees. There's no way you could ever test that. But anyway, it probably will drop the temperature by 1 or 2 degrees of the VRM. It's some extra ventilation that can go through and somewhere the air can exit, which is always a good thing. I'm always a fan of that. But that's also another improvement that we did not have in the original Z790 Master. Okay, now that we got the VRM out the way, guys, we obviously have 2 8-pin power connectors up here, and both of those are made out of solid pins along with the 24-pin over here. Now, you either have folded pins or solid pins. Solid pins are definitely better. Most motherboard manufacturers do not tell you what you got. Most of your very cheaper motherboards are folded pins. A lot of your higher end stuff is solid pins. But it is something that Gigabyte has put solid pins on both of the 8 pins and the 24 pin, and they want to make sure that we know about it in their marketing, which is fine. I'm glad that they got them. Now up here at the top we have 2 4-pin fan headers. I'm talking about these first because they are almost hidden. I was actually looking for them when I was counting. There's 10 total 4-pin fan headers on this motherboard. 2 of them are up here. Some of them are designed for just case fans. Some of them are designed to be water cooling, for water cooling pumps and case fans. There is plenty 4-pin fan headers on this motherboard. 10 is an excellent number. You don't have anything to worry about. Total flagship status there. Okay, guys. Obviously, as we go around the motherboard, we have more 4-pin fan headers. One thing we got on this motherboard, and a lot of like current generation motherboards are doing this. A few years ago, as RGB was progressing and the standards were kind of getting set, most of the time we had 2 12-volt RGBs, and then we had 2 5-volt addressable RGBs. Well, hardly nobody uses 12-volt RGB anymore. Now, we always do want at least one of those on our motherboard in case we want to just use some plain white lights or blue lights or whatever kind of LED strips we want to order from Amazon or AliExpress. But almost all of the devices that we plug up these days, whether it be fan, AIO pumps, water cooling blocks, they're almost all addressable RGB, and that runs off of the 5-volt headers. So what Gigabyte and a lot of other manufacturers are doing now, they're giving us 3 addressable 5-volt headers and 1 12-volt header. So up here at the top we have one of the 5-volt headers, and then down here at the bottom you have your 12 volt and your other two 5 volt headers. So a total of 3 5 volt addressable RGB headers, and then one 12 volt that's just plain RGB. Whatever color it comes in, it comes in. Now, rounding around that motherboard right here, we have our power switch. That is mostly used for if you have it on a test bench, if you have your case open and you're testing things, you just want to pop that power switch. That's great higher end, mid-range, high-end feature. What's so important to me is that Dr. Debug LED right there, guys. When a motherboard does not have that, it really gets on my nerves, especially in the $400 price range. And we're at a point now where almost all motherboards under $450, at least at their starting price, do not have Dr. Debug LEDs or Dr. Debug postcodes, excuse me. A lot of motherboards will have the plain 4 LEDs, which we also have those down here in the bottom right corner, that will say VGA, boot, CPU, and DRAM. That's good and all. If you don't have nothing else, you can, get a magnifying glass, take a picture of it with your phone, zoom in so you can see it. It's so small you can't even read it unless you really get something to magnify it. When you actually have an actual postcode, it will tell you exactly what's going on. It will give you a code, most of you already know this, that'll tell you exactly what the problem is and why your system is not booting. That is a feature. It's not a must-have for a lot of people, but for me, I can't stand not to have one. And what really disgusts me is that they've turned it into some kind of elite premium feature, which it shouldn't be. My God, how much can that thing possibly cost? That part is really ridiculous. But anyway, going on down to motherboard, guys, we got our internal USB 3.2 by 2 header, which is also good for 20 gigabits per second, like the other two 20 gigabits per second USB Type-C ports we have on the back. Then right here we had these two headers right here. Each one of them is good for 2 USB 3.0 Type A headers at 5 gigabits per second. That is awesome for cases like the Lee & Lee 011 Dynamic XL that I have, that have 4 USB ports, 2 on the top, 2 on the bottom, and are all 3.0. On my current X570 Dark Hero, I can only plug 2 of those in. That is definitely an excellent feature. Excuse me. This right here, guys, this is a quick release for our PCI Express slot. I'm going to take this off in just a second so you can see that, but that is a very good feature. I have thought about that years ago. Why didn't we have something like that when I'm trying to help a friend or whatever the case may be, and I'm trying to tell them to put their finger or get a screwdriver around the graphics card to pop this latch right here. Well, you no longer have to do that with this motherboard. Asus is doing that on a lot of other motherboards, such as the Tough series, which I've been using in some of my family and friends builds lately. That is an awesome feature, especially for a Novus PC user, but I don't ever want to go back to not having one of these. That is just fantastic. Coming on down to motherboard, guys, we got 4 SATA 3 ports, each good for 6 gigabits per second. Now, I am totally fine with the newer motherboards only having 4 SATA ports, especially when we have 5 M.2 slots. We're going to talk about that in a second, because what they've done here is one of the absolute best features of this motherboard. It's so user friendly, and I love what they've done with the M.2 slots. But since we have 5 M.2 slots, 4 of which we can use without taking any PCI Express lanes away from our graphics card, I'm fine with only 4 SATA ports. Sound off in the comments if y'all guys disagree, but I'm cool with that on a higher end motherboard. Now, a little bit further down, guys, we got 2 90-degree 4-pin fan headers. I'm a huge fan of that. You can come right around the back side of your case and just go straight 90 degrees and not have to bring the cable out 90 degrees. That helps a lot with cable management. I'm a huge fan of that. Right underneath of that, we have our 2 Thunderbolt headers, one for our USB Type-C ports and one for the controller. Right here is all of our front panel connections. That is what you're going to hook that G connector to that we talked about in the intro, where you can plug all your little front panel wires into the G connector and then hook that right there. That's something I'm a big fan of. All manufacturers do not do that, by the way. Gigabyte has done that for years, and I have been a huge fan of that on every Gigabyte motherboard I have ever owned in the past decade. So down here, guys, we got one thermistor hook up for a thermistor cable, and we have another one up there. Now, also what we have down here is a BIOS jumper, clear CMOS jumper. Do not get that mixed up with your thermistor. It's very easy to do. They look just alike. I don't know what would happen if you shorted the thermistor cable. Hopefully nothing, but yeah, just try not to get those mixed up. Look at your motherboard diagram. on the Gigabyte website before you go trying to clear the CMOS with the jumper. Coming on down here, guys, we got our TPM module header, which nobody's probably going to use for normal daily activity and gaming use, productivity, whatever. Of course, more 4-pin fan headers. We have our little white reset switch, which can also be programmed to do 3 additional things. As the stock setting, it is a reset switch. If you want to change that, you can go into BIOS. That's always a plus when you can customize your buttons on your motherboard. Down here, we got our standard 2 headers for our USB 2.0 ports. That's good for 4 USB 2.0 ports. Most higher end cases don't even come with 2 USB 2.0 ports anymore, but they are definitely useful. A lot of times we use them for hooking up RGB controllers for our fans and pump headers and all that good stuff. And sometimes for lower end cases and even higher end cases that might have a couple extra USB 2.0 ports. Down here, of course, more 4-pin fan headers, the RGB headers that we already talked about, the little noise header that you're going to plug that tiny little cable up to the speaker cable that we looked at when we took everything out of the motherboard box. And down here at the very end, to close things out, we have this tiny little header right here. Nobody's going to use that unless you're at a CES show, unless you work for Gigabyte. That's just to show your RGB off. If you've got a plug to plug up to that custom header, and it probably goes into like a Molex cable into a power supply or whatever, that's just to display all the RGB on the motherboard, show it off at a trade show or whatever. And then last but not least is our front panel audio that once again hardly nobody uses anymore. It's always good to hook it up, but hardly nobody uses it. And this ESS Saber DAC that's on this motherboard does not go through there. So one very important thing that we're going to talk about here, and one of the best features of this motherboard, is these M.2 slots and the heat sinks that go on them. So this is our Gen 5 drive right here. This huge heat sink, guys, is so massive, and I love it, but I do recommend that most people buying this motherboard, especially with 4080s and 4090s, I do recommend that you don't use that. That will take half of your lanes away from your graphics card. That one downside to the Intel platform, it's not really a downside to me because it's not going to make a difference in no game. I got Samsung 990 Pros that I'm putting in here. They are lightning fast NVMe drivers, and hardly nobody's ever going to know the difference between that and a Gen 5 drive. So it's not a big deal to me. People get way caught up in the Gen 5 thing. But anyway, this nice heat sink here, guys, as nice as it is, all you got to do is pop that latch, pull it off like that. You got a thermal pad on the front side, a thermal pad on the back side. And it's a shame that they put that, this nice heat sink on the slot that's not the primary slot. Your actual primary slot, the one that you get 4 PCI Express 4.0 lanes directly from the CPU for the NVMe drive without taking anything away from your graphics card, well, that would be this top slot right here, guys. That would be this top slot. The other 3 are connected to the chipset. So this one is connected to the lanes that you share with your graphics card. That will be PCI Express 5.0, but it will cause your 4090 to lose performance, especially at lower resolutions when you're playing esports and stuff like that. This next one is your primary slot connected to your CPU at PCI Express 4.0 by 4, and then these 3 are all connected to the chipset. Now this also has thermal pads on both sides. On the back side, we always have them on the front side, but one of the things that we have now that we haven't always had is thermal pads on the back side of all of our M.2 drives, which is a great thing, especially with so many of them being double-sided these days. So 2 other things we got to talk about before we end this video, guys. The audio section. Now, obviously, we got to cut down audio, and if you're just looking down here, it looks like, my God, what are them 3 tiny little capacitors? Well, they're your standard capacitors, and we also have 4 WIMA capacitors right here, these red capacitors. And those WIMA capacitors, along with the standard capacitors, they will do a pretty good job, especially since we got to cut down audio section. We don't have a 5.1 or a 7.1, and that's why they're getting away with this. We also have a nice ESS Saber DAC that's going to be hooked to our rear audio ports. It does nothing on the front audio port. Like I said, most people won't use that. But we should have a really good audio solution. I don't care about not having 5.1 and 7.1 as long as we have a good audio solution. Last but not least, and one of the most controversial things Gigabyte has done here. I might sound like I've been a little hard on them in this video, but I'm a huge fan of this motherboard. Overall, it started out at $550. It's down to $500 right now at B&H Photo and Video and Newegg. I'm a huge fan of this motherboard. One thing that they really got to straighten out though is the specifications of these slots. Now, in the original Z790 Master, both of these slots ran at PCI Express 3.0 speeds. What you have in the top slot is PCI Express by 1. You have 1 lane, and then you have 4 lanes in the bottom slot. Now, like I said on the original Z790 Master, as far as all the specifications say, they run at PCI Express 3.0. The problem when you get to this motherboard is, if you're just looking at the basic summary, especially on a cell phone, if you're on your mobile phone, if you go to Gigabyte's website and look at the Master X, it says that these 2 slots are PCI Express 4.0, 1 lane and 4 lanes, which the lanes are correct, at least according to the actual print on the motherboard. They're both, the actual slots could be wired for 4 lanes, but the top one's only wired for 1, the bottom one is wired for 4 lanes, and you can tell that by the surface mount devices that's right above them. Now, here's where the controversy comes in. Like I said, when you're just looking at the basic menu, you have Gigabyte saying they're at PCI Express 4.0. Then on the back of this box, it says the top slot is PCI Express 3.0 and the bottom slot with 4 lanes is PCI Express 4.0. And then when you look at the actual specifications of the motherboard, it says both of them are PCI Express 3.0. So we have 3 different specifications. We don't know which one it is. I'm pretty sure they're both PCI Express 3.0. But anyway, guys, that's the only big downfall I see with this motherboard, as far as, like, you know, what they're advertising along with the 8266 memory. We're going to be testing that all out, guys, so be sure to get subscribed. Thank each and every one of y'all for watching this video. I appreciate each and every one of y'all so much. Like I said, make sure y'all get subscribed so y'all don't miss the upcoming content. We got so much stuff upcoming. Thank each and every one of y'all again, and we will see y'all soon.